your God concept and looking at how that relates to your answers on the rest of the survey. So what we found is that the more participants anthropomorphize God, the more likely they were to say that God is visually perceivable, he actually has an appearance that can be discerned, that he intervenes in human affairs, that he answers prayers, that he has physical properties and biological properties. Pretty much everybody thinks he has psychological properties, but there was variation in whether you made biological or physical attributions. And also, that group was slightly more likely to say that God's existence is 100% certain, given like a scale of certainty. The next section was about angels and Satan, and similar kinds of questions. What are angels? Where do they come from? What do they look like? What do they do? Do they have these various properties? And how confident are you that they exist? Similar kind of results. The more a participant anthropomorphized God, the more likely they were to, first of all, just claim that angels exist, but beyond that, also to claim that angels have a visual appearance, that they act as God's helpers, they have a very specific role that they play, as opposed to abstract things like they're a part of God. They intervene in human affairs, like helping people. They have physical properties, biological properties, and their existence is 100% certain. Same kind of results for Satan, with a few correlations dropping out and being significant. Again, for those of you who aren't familiar with the correlations, the R's can actually range from 0 to 1, 0 being no correlation at all, 1 being perfect correlation, and the asterisks indicate correlations that were reliable, statistically significant. So the next section was about heaven and hell. What is heaven? Where is heaven? What does heaven look like? What happens in heaven? Stays in heaven. How confident are you that heaven exists? And same questions for hell. And here, the more you anthropomorphize God, the more likely you were to believe that heaven actually exists, and also that heaven has a visual appearance, and it occupies a discrete location in space. It's a place. The other correlations weren't significant. For hell, same kinds of correlations, but then a few other correlations were significant. There was a belief that human activities continue in hell. It's basically like an altered state of existence, but not a happy state. And hell's existence is 100% certain. So I think the most interesting parts of the survey were actually when I started asking about theological questions, like where did the world come from? How do you think about evil, the problem of evil? So part 4 was all about origins, Genesis. We asked these questions in triplets. Do you think the universe was created by God, created by the Big Bang, or if you answered yes to both, how do you resolve the tension if you said both those things happened? And then the same thing for humans, except instead of the Big Bang, the relevant origin is evolution. So we didn't find much of a relationship with origin beliefs about the universe. There was a slight correlation between claiming that God is abstract and that the universe was created solely in the Big Bang. But there was a stronger correlation between beliefs about evolution, that the more you anthropomorphize God, the more likely you were to claim that God created humans via evolution. And then if you didn't anthropomorphize God, you're more likely to say that humans just evolved and God didn't have any say in it. The next section, we asked about 2 well-known theological problems, the problem of evil and the problem of sin. So the problem of evil is basically, how could it be that God is all-powerful and all-good, but yet he still allows human suffering? So we asked that in a series of 3 questions. Yes or no, God is all-powerful. Yes or no, God is all-good. If you answered yes to both questions, why is it that God would allow human suffering, since he could stop it, since he's all-powerful and he is all-good? The problem of sin was framed similarly. Here, the relevant tension is, do you think God is all-knowing? Do you think God punishes those who have sinned? If you said yes to both, why is it that God would punish people he knows will sin, and knows in like an absolute sense? So what you find is actually pretty understandable ways of resolving these problems based on your God concept. The more individuals anthropomorphize God, the more likely they were to say that yes, God is all good and all powerful, and he uses suffering as a tool for teaching or punishing. And then the more you God, the more likely you're to say that, yes, God is all-knowing, and yes, he punishes those who sin, but the reason he does that is because he gave humans free will. So, again, the God concepts are correlated not just with like angel concepts, heaven concepts, but actually ways of thinking about theological issues. So, here's a little summary of the data thus far. What I've got down here in the bottom are the number of properties that participants attributed to God. So there were actually 12 in this case instead of 9. That was in the previous study. And down here on the y-axis in the bottom panel is the number of subjects, the percentage of subjects who provided those numbers of attributions. And then above that, you see a mean number of humanistic responses. So I just summed humanistic responses across all 5 sections. And what you see is as your concept becomes more and more anthropomorphic, you're becoming more and more humanistic in the way you think about divine matters. There seems to be a bit of a plateau that when you start anthropomorphizing God at the 5 property level, then you've flattened out, but I won't really go into that. This is just the basic correlation between those 2 things. So the last thing I'll mention is that it turns out that this is not just about beliefs. It's not just cognitive. It's actually behavioral. That people who anthropomorphize God do different things religiously. So we asked about, do you ever engage in prayer? How often do you pray? Do you ever attend religious services? How often do you attend services? Have your religious beliefs changed over time? And if so, how have they changed? And what we found was that the more you anthropomorphize God, the more likely you were at least to pray occasionally and even to pray daily. The more you anthropomorphize God, the more likely you were to attend services, at least on a weekly basis. And the more you anthropomorphize God, the less likely you were to claim that your beliefs have changed over time, which is very consistent with the previous data. Children anthropomorphize God a lot, and so it's, I think there might be some accuracy there in saying that my beliefs haven't changed that much. So to summarize, the more participants anthropomorphize God, the more they anthropomorphize other religious beings, Satan and angels, spatialize religious places, actually treating heaven and hell as discrete locations in space, as opposed to like states of being. That was like the alternative. The more they endorse the idea of divine creation for humans at least, the more they endorse the idea of divine justice when it comes to why suffering exists and why sinners are punished. And this idea of divine intervention as well. They're more likely to pray and think that prayer is efficacious. And other religious behaviors. So to conclude, those individual differences that I first noted in that study with the kids, when I just look at adults, it turns out they're not superficial, epiphenomenal. They actually are meaningful. They relate to how the adults think about theological divine matters as a whole. That you actually see 2 different theories of God emerging that's based around a different core concept, either an abstract concept or an anthropomorphic concept. I just said that. So let me just give you some general conclusions in the last 5 minutes, and then I'll open it for questions. I thought a good way of concluding is by going back to why I study development, or many other cognitive developmentalists study development, and actually reflect on what these data tell us about the representational format, computational structure, innate foundations, and interpersonal variability of beliefs about the physical world. So representational format. I think for both of these domains that I've been looking at, evolution, God, or religion, there's evidence there that the beliefs comprise intuitive theories. That is, they're not just some random collection of beliefs. The beliefs are interrelated in a meaningful way. And you see that empirically too, that there's significant correlations among the beliefs. So they seem to comprise theories. And I'm using the word theories not in the scientific sense, but in a more a less loaded sense of the beliefs being consistent with one another and causal explanatory in nature. I mean, they foster predictions and explanations. But what's also interesting is that a lot of people have looked at intuitive theories and found evidence of intuitive theories in other domains. But in these domains, what's interesting is that there are marked differences between intuitive theories and scientific theories. First of all, the theories don't have to be veridical. People hold the wrong views about